Welcome back. So as promised, when I reviewed the Hidizs MM2, I wanted to briefly talk about the Hidizs S3 Pro USB-C dongle. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on it because every review of this device goes about the same way. It's a tiny device with a really great build quality, sort of a metal puck, and it's got a indicator light right in the middle. It's got a copper and silver braided cable and nice top quality USB-C plug. But the gist of this device is it's just a great implementation of the ESS 9281C Pro chipset. And by great implementation, I mean it pretty much sounds like every other implementation. There's no surprises here. There's no wacky coloration to it unless you want it. So I think, in general, it's just kind of a top-notch ESS implementation, plus you get MQA unfolding in hardware with the 1 Pro version versus just the 0 version. So let's kind of walk through it. As I said, it is an ESS 9281C Pro. So for those of you who may have a 920, that's essentially the same chip minus the MQA. This one does do MQA 8X unfolding in hardware on the chip. And PCM supports up to 32-bit, 384 kilohertz, and DSD 128. If you happen to have DSD 256, it half works. It definitely started playing something that resembled the track, but it sounded a little clipped or truncated. It sounded kind of weird, but it didn't crash. It just not officially supported either. So the output power is kind of on the lower side. It's about 55 milliwatts at 320 ohms. And it does feature a 3.5 millimeter single-ended, so that's what this guy is. It is not a balanced output, just a 3.5 millimeter single-ended. And as I said, it actually does have 3 firmware choices. For those of you who want something more colored, out of the box, it's this neutral, and I would call it neutral, but quite musical. It's not a flat, boring, neutral sound to it at all. And I think generally the ESS 9280 chipsets, other dongles, kind of have a very similar feel to it. They're not super colored at all. They're very neutral, but still maintain a nice musicality to it, so they're not boring or uninteresting. So on this one, you do have a choice of 3, and you can go bass or this neutral musical or treble. I'm not sure I would choose either one of them. I would likely forget about it and then review some IEM badly because I forgot that the base firmware was on my dongle. So I stuck with the neutral. That's the way all my other devices, dongles, DAPs, I try to keep everything as neutral as I can, just for that one reason. And in the spec sheet, it does say that there's Panasonic capacitors, which do something to enhance your listening experience. Not too sure what that really meant. As I mentioned, the cable braiding, it is a 2-core, and it's actually copper OFC and high purity silver braided together, so that's kind of cool. You don't see that every day. And in the box, you actually do get 2 high-res audio certified stickers for people who are into that meme. So pros, like I said, no surprises. It's a neutral but forgiving detail level implementation of this ESS DAC. 3 firmware choices if you want more or less color, but I definitely prefer the neutral. And and I think that's what this one comes down to and why I like these kind of dongles. I don't really like anything that's super detailed, super sharp, super bright. I think those are interesting to listen to for a few minutes, and then they sort of feel a little less than natural. So I very much do like these ESS chipsets, and I do like neutral tune DACs as well. So the MQA support is actually very good on this. I'm kind of a big fan of it. I'm a little bit more of a fan of the MQA support than the actual dongle itself. And what I mean by that is you can actually connect this to a bigger amplifier. So like I said, the power is on a little lower side. So if you actually run this into a more inexpensive headphone amplifier, you'll actually hear that the MQA support is actually quite good and probably better than when I started out using my LG phone with not the same ESS chipset, but the previous generation ESS chipsets, which also did MQA unfolding on the chip, but I think this one actually kind of edges it out. It actually, I don't know why, but the MQA support, and I've been using Tidal for a few years, it's actually really good. So I'll say it kind of works flawlessly with UAP. DSD128 sounds great. There's no background noise, which is another huge bonus on dongles. There's nothing more annoying than hearing a constant background hiss on your IEMs. And the stage is kind of okay, mainly due to its power, but it's probably okay relative to the price. But that would definitely be one of my nitpicks. So on the con side, it's a great DAC, but mostly for MQA users. So at $70, you're essentially paying, a little bit of a tax just to support this 9281 version, this 9281C version, the Pro version, which is MQA support, which versus the cheaper 8.0 version, which doesn't have MQA support. So yeah, I would say that this one is mainly geared towards MQA users who are willing to pay that little extra to get unfolding from Tidal in hardware. And like I said, sounds great, but do be aware that you are essentially paying a little bit more for that functionality. So make sure you're going to use it. And the output power is on the low side for the price. Even at $70, I think 55 milliwatts is still on the lower side. Maybe it's middle of the road, but I would call it on the lower side. And perhaps that was just a technical trade-off of their performance versus power consumption, because the power consumption is actually quite good and there's no noise. So, I mean, I'm sure there was some engineering trade-off as to why they picked that number versus a higher number that other companies may have used for the same chipset. And to get around that, like I said, I would pair it with an inexpensive headphone amplifier if you really want to understand the difference between easy to drive. No one ever says that the S3 Pro won't drive, probably all of your IEMs. I think it has enough power to do that, but does it really give you the best version of that IEM? And I would say exactly what I said about the MM2 is the pairing of these two doesn't really bring out the best out of the MM2. Not quite enough power, not quite enough resolution and detail that this one really demanded. So I'd say, at $70, IEMs that are probably below that price, you're probably fine. When you start hitting the $70 and more IEMs, I would think about stepping up to the S9 or something with a bit more power with a balanced output, because that's where these guys tend to give you that little bit of extra beyond what you're used to in the budget range. Why does this sound like $70 versus $30? A lot of that is just easier, more noticeable if you have a higher output device. And I think these two together didn't really do it for me. But, will the S3 Pro drive this without problem? Sure. It just wasn't the best version or the optimal version that I was expecting or listened to when I plugged it into a headphone app. So that's the deal on the S3 Pro. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.